Welcome to the Faith Together podcast from the Center for Faith and Family at Olivet Nazarene University. If you believe that passing down Christian faith is essential for the next generation, you are in the right place. Enjoy conversations with guests who are faith practitioners, parents, caregivers, pastors, counselors, and many more. You'll enjoy practical tools and community for passing down Christian faith to your children and grandchildren.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Faith Together podcast. This is Lindsey, and I am so glad to be back with you today. I am here solo hosting our show today. Leon is actually traveling back from a really fun trip that he took out west to visit the Bible Project. So we're excited to hear more about that here in just another week or so. He'll give us a little update. But today I am not completely solo. I have some great guests with me that I think you're going to love to hear from because today, as you all know, we are starting a brand new series, and our series is called Be a Blessing. The last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about scripture and how to study the Bible with your kids and with your family at home. And so today we want to just walk that out together. What does it mean to practice hospitality in the way that we see in scripture by blessing those around us? And so as we head into the Thanksgiving season, we thought this would be a really, really practical conversation for us all to have. So today, I am thrilled to be joined by two friends, Dave Ferguson and Jeff Stark. Welcome, Dave and Jeff, to the Faith Together podcast.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, we're so glad that you're here. So friends that you're listening, I want to share a little bit of Dave and Jeff and how they came to be friends of ours here at the podcast. A couple of years ago, actually, Jeff gave me a book called B.L.E.S.S, and it was a book all about how to bless our neighbors and those around us in our neighborhoods, of course, and in our communities. And that book was written by Dave Ferguson, who's with us today. And I just was really caught by this book, thought it was so practical and great, not only for adults, but for kids and for families too. And so we're going to just dive into what this book is all about. We'll make sure that book is also linked on our website for you guys so you can get it wherever you get your books. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what this bless pattern can look like for us in our everyday lives. So before we jump into all of that, I would like to just have Dave and Jeff introduce themselves. Dave, can you just give us a little introduction of where you come from and what you're all about?
Sure. Glad to, Lindsey. I'm married to Sue. I have 3 adult kids, Amy and Josh and Caleb. One lives in Chicago where we live, and the other lives out in D.C., another one in Grand Rapids. And I think wear 3 hats. I'm the lead pastor at Community Christian Church in Chicago. We have locations across the city and suburbs. And I also am the lead visionary for New Thing. So we plant churches in last count 69 different countries around the world.
Amazing.
And then I'm also the CEO for Exponential. And so those are kind of the 3 things that occupy a lot of my time.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to have you here. And today you got a chance to speak at Olivet's Chapel. And so it's been great to be able to connect with you this afternoon. And later tonight, we're starting a conference, right? An evangelism conference here on campus. So it's wonderful to have you with us. Jeff, how about you? Can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'll start with, it's always great to pay attention to those who have wisdom. And so you start with, I'm the husband of Angie, instead of, I might have started with my professional role. And I'm like, no, that makes a lot more sense. Do that, Jeff. So I'm a husband to Angie, and I've got 2 adult children and an amazing daughter-in-law. They live in multiple different places, and we're just blessed beyond measure for them. Professionally, I am a trained missional theologian and a missiologist, and so I spend all my time thinking about the church as mission. And so that led me to Olivet back in 2017. 2019, I came on as faculty, and now I I oversee the graduate programming for Olivet Nazarene School of Theology and Christian Ministry, and then I spend a lot of my time as a missiologist working with churches to help mobilize them for mission and asking the question, what does it mean for the church to understand itself postured to the world around it in very redemptive ways? And so the kind of content that we're going to be talking about today in terms of B.L.E.S.S is right up that alley, and so I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, so great to have you here with us, and I'm a big fan of Angie as well, so shout out to Angie today. Well, we want to just get started with this thought of how do we be a blessing to others in our lives? And I think I was sharing with you guys before we went on air that as a resident director here at Olivet, we were talking about what it means to be a blessing with our RAs as we started this school year. And a lot of us had to laugh because we just think of the hashtag blessed, just the generic term that you hear when you hear blessing, blessed. But we know there's so much more there. And it's actually a part of our role as of being part of the members of the family of God. And so today, I just love to hear, Dave, as you looked to write B.L.E.S.S, what was the inspiration behind it? Kind of what led you to that place to put together the book that we love?
Yeah. I think for me, it kind of grew out of some mistakes and some frustrations. When I was probably around 19, 20, that's when I think God's grace really grabbed a hold of me, and I really understood that I am loved just as I am, not as I should be, that no matter what. And that was, I was so amped, so excited about that. I wanted to share with everybody. And I did, quite frankly, in some obnoxious ways. Like I was that guy who would be out in the streets, and I would talk to people just walking up to them and begin to try to initiate a conversation. Or I was also that guy who would go door to door, and if they would open the door, I would start in on a spiritual conversation. And it was well-intentioned, but I think I was sometimes asking questions they had no interest in answering, and I was answering questions that they weren't asking. What I discovered is that people weren't feeling loved. And they weren't coming to know God's love. So I kind of swung the pendulum all the other way, and I said, okay, you know what? And this is about the time we planted a church, and I said, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to live my life like Jesus, and that'll show people. Not so much with the actions and words, but just live my life. And people thought I was a good neighbor, but didn't necessarily come to know God's love. And I don't think it really impacted them. And I wanted something, I knew there had to be a better way. And I also wanted, not just for me, but now for the people in the church that I was pastoring. And I think that's what led us to really begin to look at how did Jesus actually, and I would say, bless people? How did he love his neighbors? And the way he used neighbors was in the broadest sense. And what we began to look at is we discovered several kind of, and I'd love to hear Jeff's thoughts on this, missional practices that Jesus did. And we took those missional practices and we kind of took like the top 5 of them, and then we put them in a real simple acronym, because I like to give things handles to people so they can hold on to them and carry them around with them in real life. And those became the B.L.E.S.S practices. And just for those who aren't familiar, it spells the word bless. And B stands for begin with prayer. So we had to stretch a little there, but begin with prayer. Then L is for listen. E is for eat. S, the first S is for serve, and the last S is for story. And we can kind of do a little deeper dive on those. But we began to do those, and we began to see, okay, people did feel genuinely loved, and people did start to understand God's love as we began to be a blessing.
That's awesome. Jeff, as you think about those 5 practices, begin with prayer, listening, eat, serve, story, how do those resonate with you as missional practices, as Dave was sharing?
Yeah, I think for me, it starts back. So I came to faith at 25, and I was thrust into a church, and I call them, I've got a language that I use for evangelists. I just call them good newsers. People who, wherever they live, work, and play, they're about the good news of Jesus. Attitudes, ambitions, actions, and words they speak. And so I was dropped into a church of what I would call rabid good newsers. These are folks who just believed in their heart of hearts that it was everybody's mission to make known the love of Jesus. And so this was like my first engagement with the church, and I made the assumption like this is what everybody does. And then I would still start to go from church to church, and then I started asking the question, is this what anybody does? Like I wasn't seeing people own their responsibility to care and love for their neighbors well. So I spent the better part of my ministry just asking questions. How do you destigmatize the work of evangelism? And recognizing that people have relationships, but I don't know that we're intentional with those relationships. So when I stumbled upon, and a little less stumbling and more intentional engagement with relationships, this B.L.E.S.S acronym, these B.L.E.S.S practices, I began, and I love the language of handles. It begins to help people to say, okay, like I'm eating with people already, but am I eating with them intentionally? And that intentionality is the key to this. Because you're asking the question, that's where beginning with prayer comes from. You're asking the question like, God, in what ways can I be a good news? Can I be blessing to someone else around me? And so when you think about missional practices, you're thinking about my posture towards the world, right? Like in what ways and in the language we use in sort of the missional community, and I think for families, they need to ask this question. We use the language so that. Anytime God does anything for Israel in the Old Testament, it's so that the rest of the world might know. And so as we as families, as we as followers of Jesus, we live so that lives. God does this in our lives so that the rest of the world might know. How do they know? By these practices, by learning to listen, by eating, by serving, by sharing story. Those things are, I think, key in terms of just intentional posturing towards neighbors and forming those relationships.
That's so good. And as we think about that phrase, so that, what are some, I guess, maybe even tangible stories or experiences you've had, Dave, with each of those practices that you've seen God show up, to be a blessing in someone's life? Is there a certain practice that you've seen really resonate with others, or someone that comes to mind that you feel have just been a true, clear story of God at work?
There's a number of stories, and probably each of the practices have a story too. I mean, I'm thinking, let's just begin with prayer. There are 8 neighbors that I pray for try to every day. And we were talking about I used to write it in my journal.
Yeah.
And now we have a B.L.E.S.S app, and I'm using that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But and like one of them is one of my neighbors, great guy, funny guy, love hanging out with the guy, but found out that he had cancer. And was able to, I just texted him and said, hey, I wanted you to know I'm praying for you. And when you're going through something like that, I mean, that's meaningful for him. And he was super grateful. In fact, it was about a month ago or so, I remember I saw him out at the mailbox. And it's funny when you're praying for your neighbors, you have a different reaction when you see, I live in the Chicagoland area. And so if we get plenty of snow, so you only get to see your neighbors about 6 months out of the year.
Sure.
So when you do see them and you've been praying for them, you have to kind of back off a little bit. Otherwise you go like, hey, there's Mike. And they don't know you've been praying for them. But there was Bill across the street, and I ran across the street. Hey, Bill, how you doing? He gave me the update, and I found out, that he got his scans and that he was cancer-free.
Amazing.
And it was so awesome. And I think part of it, there was a different connection for him. I think it also helped accelerate his spiritual life, some of the things he's going through. And I think I got to play a very small part by praying for him in that. And that's one example, just right in my neighborhood.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, too, that when we are intentional and we take that time to really stop and to pause and to be present with others, there's no telling what God will do. I think a lot of times we say, hey, I'm waiting on God for this and I'm waiting on God for that. And we are, and it's important to wait on the Lord. But he's also waiting on us just to see what's around us.
I think that's such a good point. I mean, the thing we have to remember is I think some of us, and Jeff, I got a hunch, you're kind of like me, you're a pretty hard driver, that we want it badly. But what we have to remember is, no, God wants it more than we do. I mean, so badly that he sent Jesus and he died for us. He would rather die than live without us. So I think we have to always remember, no, you know what? God's already at work in Bill's life. God's already at work in my neighbors to the right, the neighbors to the left, and the couple down the street that I pray for on a regular basis. I think that's really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. So when we think about the acronym, you talked a little bit about begin with prayer. And as we go into L, listening, we talk a lot about listening on our podcast, actually. Even though we're doing a lot of talking here on the podcast, we talk about how important it is for our kids to be listened to and for, as a family, to model good listening, to build that trust so that when those hard conversations come and when those hard times come, there's built trust that the family is a safe place for kids, for teens to come to. And so I'm just curious to both of you, and whoever wants to jump in on this one can, when it comes to listening, what have you seen God do through that practice for adults, and how might you see that even be a greater practice for the families that are listening today.
Yeah, I think you used a word there, Lindsey, that is key for that, and that is the word curious. I think listeners are insatiably curious. And, I think there's a tendency to want to jump to tell our stories, want to be able to share what's happening in our lives. But there is something, and it's in the book. There's a quote in the book, and I'm probably going to misphrase it, but it basically says, there may be no clearer way for a person to feel loved than to feel listened to. Mm. And I think that is so key because no one's paying attention. So when you sit with someone and you make them the priority and you are curious enough to ask the question, tell me more, there's so much that comes out. So it's always interesting to me. I think we jump to conclusions without being curious. And when you jump to conclusions without curiosity, that tends to lead towards judgment and condemnation. But what happens when you listen, you understand the backstories that inform people's lives. And when you understand their backstories, you understand what are the struggles they're dealing with? What are the questions that they're asking? What are the assumptions that they've made about me or about Christianity? And you begin to mine those things out. And when you mine those things out, when you ultimately start to speak, you're speaking from a place of informed care rather than just presumption. And I think those are key.
Yeah, that's really good.
I think one of the things too, since we have so many parents listening, like when our kids were younger, eating was a big deal for us. We would almost always be together for dinner, but that's a great place for listening. And a simple tool to go with that listening practice is like high-low. Mm-hmm. You've done that, right?
Yep.
So everybody gets a chance. Just let's go around the table and what was your high today and what was your low? And everybody gets a chance to talk and everybody else gets a chance to listen. I mean, I've also done it in small groups, our missional communities, and it works great there, but it also works at home in a great way.
Yeah.
You asked a question of me earlier that I think is a great question when we get to listening. You were just sitting in the green room earlier and you said, what is bringing you joy? Mm. And when you ask that question to people, it will stop them in the tracks because it really does force them to ask some serious questions about their own life. And you're inviting them to consider the delight that's in their lives. Those simple questions, high, lows, what brings you joy? Those are just great opportunities to delve deep, and they show a concern for people.
Yeah, I love that question. That's a great one. I'm going to use that one.
Okay.
As we think about the next letter, E, eat. This one feels self-explanatory because who doesn't love to eat?
Right.
I love to eat. Everyone loves to eat. But one thing that when I was reading the book and revisited it even this summer, that I was taken aback by was, I think it was a quote by N.T. Wright that shares that Jesus shared the gospel in his final days, not in a synagogue, but at a table around a meal. That is so powerful to think about that model that Jesus gave us at the table, sharing the cup and the bread. And so today, as we think about eating and blessing our neighbors through eating, what are some ways that you've seen God at work in that particular part of the mission?
I think nothing moves an acquaintance to a friendship like food. I mean, Jeff's kind of smirking. True. I got a hunch. I don't know Jeff and Angie's story, but I got a hunch there was probably a time when he was interested and probably there's a lot of conversation and he was paying a lot of attention by listening. And then he says, hey, would you like to have lunch? Am I right?
Yeah, I tend to jump to eat pretty quickly. I was a 300-pound offensive lineman, so that was my go-to
you were
pretty
ready.
quickly. Yeah, but yes, but of course.
And you guys know Aurelio's Pizza?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, the home of Aurelio's Pizza. I mean, for my wife Sue and I, that's when it went from an acquaintance, to a friendship. Like I knew I was into her, but hey, I think maybe she's into me. I think that's how you make friends.
Yeah,
is eating like that together, and nothing does it quite like food.
Yeah, you're right. I think back on when my husband Jamin and I were dating. We had our first, I would say, official date at a great Northwest Ohio restaurant, Cheddar's. And we just were there for 3 hours because 1, the rolls never stopped coming. They were delicious. And 2, we just had so much to talk about. But you're right. It does. The table just has a way of creating space for people to be known and to be heard in really practical ways.
And speaking of practical ways, I mean, just yesterday, Sue was saying, hey, you know what? Halloween's coming up. And so all of our neighbors are going to participate in Halloween. And so one of the things that we've done and we'll do this year is we'll drag our fire pit out to the front by the sidewalk and a couple of lawn chairs and all of our candy and stuff. But we'll also get a hold of some of the other neighbors and say, hey, we're going to have, I think, chili. And then they'll ask them to bring some stuff. And so all of a sudden we'll all pass out candy together. But it's, again, around food that kind of brings, food and fire, brings us together. And it'll literally kind of rekindle some friendships.
Yeah. Love that. I've seen that to be true. I shared with you guys, I serve as pastor to children and families at Gathering Point, but also as a resident director here on campus. And I just love pouring into young women and seeing them grow into who God's called them to be. And one of the things that we've come to do as a tradition is soup Sundays.
Oh, that's awesome.
So every Sunday there is a different soup that I make and provide, and they bring different things for it. And we all just sit around the table and talk. And Soup Sunday has kind of become this thing. It's starting to grow a little bit more into some other areas. And we've just seen God do so much work just around a bowl of soup. And it's not even the best soup in the world, but, it works.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, we work so hard at creating discipleship curriculum that it turns out if someone just makes a bowl of soup.
Oh, man.
You got some thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah. So one of the greatest privileges I had was I spent 3 years serving in the city of Chicago. And Chicago is one eating city, right? Mm-hmm. Coffee and food, those go a long way in the city of Chicago. And so when I went there, I wasn't pastoring a church. I was going there as in a sense, an urban missionary. And so where was I going to meet people? It wasn't going to be inviting them to a church or having a Bible study. I had to go down to the local cafe. And so I sat in the coffee shop and I forged relationships around cups of coffee and muffins and donuts. And then from that, those relationships didn't translate again into church attendance. Now we're sitting at these restaurants and we're sharing meals. And one of the things that I think I would like to say about eating is it's not just the table you set for others. It's also at times they set tables for you. And so one of the ways in which I realized how deeply forged a friendship became with people who were disconnected from Jesus was at one point, my wife and I were invited to their family's Thanksgiving dinner in the city. And so and we realized this is the depth of friendship that would not have happened if I would have gone in there with the assumptions that I need to get you into my church. No, I want to be a part of your life. And then they invited me into their lives. And so those are the kind of gifts that you experience where relationships become deeply vulnerable and real around those tables.
It's funny. I almost feel embarrassed sometimes, and oftentimes when I'm teaching the B.L.E.S.S practices, I'll pause and go what this really is, it's like a remedial course in how to be friends with somebody.
Yes.
You pray for them, you listen, you eat, and then when they tell you what they need, you serve, and then if they ask, you share their story. I mean,
it really is.
Yeah,
and we make it a lot more complicated than it needs to be, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's resonating so deeply, especially with this current generation, because they are so isolated and they can feel really paralyzed on how to make a friend and how to find their people. And so this is such, like you said, something with a handle that they can grab onto and say, this is what it looks like. And I just also want to mention to, parents listening today that this EAT principle is something you can do very practically as a family at home. I
want to say something to that, Lindsey. So I was just with my oldest son 2 weekends ago, and we were reflecting on the past experiences of pastoring. And there was a time in my ministry where I did a lot of street ministry. So I was working a lot with the homeless and those who were suffering from mental health episodes and drug addiction. And my son looked at me and he goes, I think when I was a kid, I probably had more dinners with homeless people than most of my friends will ever in their lives. And it struck me that was the norm in our lives. Hey, if I pick you up, my kids are with me, we're going to go to a diner and sit and have dinner together. And that's just going to be the normal thing. And so it in a sense, it was formative for my kids in ways that I hadn't even anticipated. It was expedient for me. I didn't have to go drop them off at the house first, right? I just brought them with me. But it became formative for them because they in a sense go, this is what we do. We share table. It doesn't matter with who. We can all sit at a diner and eat dinner together. And those kind of formative experiences can feel non-threatening, can disarm, but also can have lasting impact with our kids that we probably don't even realize at the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I am a testimony of that as well. My own life, my family, we just always had the doors open appropriately and served others. And I can see that being such a part of the value of my own walk with the Lord. And it is something that can become ingrained in your family culture, and it can go a really long way. And so I just want to encourage parents out there that practicing hospitality by hosting a meal is such a doable thing to show your kids, who God is and how he uses us in others' lives. Well, as we wrap up here, I can't believe how fast our time has gone, but we're to the final two letters of bless, serve and share your story. And so serve, I would love to hear, I know in the book you talk a little bit about RPMs and like the relational ways, physical ways, and
mental and spiritual.
Mental and spiritual, yes. Can you talk a little bit about those RPMs and how those play into serving someone?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is RPMs is something that I kind of use personally on a daily basis to go like, okay, how am I doing relationally? How am I doing physically? How am I doing mentally? How am I doing spiritually? Because as a leader, I want to avoid drifting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think, but you can also then apply them in a relationship too. Like, okay, so how is that person doing relationally? What's going on in their marriage? What's going on with their kids? What's going on, in their work? How are they doing physically? Like I mentioned, my neighbor who's sick. How are they doing mentally? There's a lot of people right now that are, post-COVID are still kind of, there's anxiety and anxiousness and fear and those kind of things. How are they doing with that? And how are they doing spiritually? And I think just that kind of gives you a 4-part kind of check-in to go like, hey, how are they doing with these things? And that could really kind of clue you in at how you could best serve them.
Absolutely. That's so good. And then our last S is share your story. Jeff, what's been your experience with sharing your story with others as you've reached out and gotten to know them?
Yeah, so for me, I use the language that when you do friendship well, you don't have to have a canned sales pitch. Your opportunities to impact them bubble to the surface from the genuine friendship. So one of the friendships that I forged in the city, I was friends with them for a year and a half and walked closely. They had drawn the line multiple times. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. And we just stayed in this deeply connected friendship and added value to one another's lives. And there was a lot of reciprocity, honoring the boundaries that they would establish because
Sure.
I didn't want to be too pushy. But then there came this point where a year and a half in, they wanted to know our story. And then I'll never forget the moment she looked at me and she said, okay, stop there and tell me, how did an atheist alcoholic become a Jesus follower? And I said, are you serious? And I wanted to make sure that I didn't overstep a boundary because she'd drawn some lines in the past. And I wanted to make sure that I honored that relationship. And because the friendship of mutual care had been forged, she was now caring for me. And that's what we have to recognize. When someone invites us to share our story or they're caring for us because they're saying, you've made me matter. And so I want you to matter in my life. And you only matter if you share the thing that's most important to you. So it was actually a gift to me that I got to share the thing that is the most important thing in my life and to have her receive that as a gift.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that's a good reminder to parents and families out there that as you share your story with your kids and you listen to their stories and you hold their stories dear, God is just going to continue to grow that and grow that connection between the two of you and grow the connection with those that are around you. Well, Dave, Jeff, this has been awesome. I know we could talk probably a whole nother half hour about all of this, but it's been great to have you here on Faith Together. And as we wrap up, just one more thought to share with our listeners. Anything you would say would be really important things to take away today as they go into their context of raising a family and sharing faith with the next generation?
I would encourage people to take those blessed practices and kind of say, how can I do just one of those every day? And even if it's just praying, okay, because sometimes Christians need to be reminded that counts.
It does,
Okay.
yes.
So just do one of those practices every day. And if you're in a small group, I also encourage people in our church, in our small group, just begin your small group by asking the question, who did you bless this week? Who did you bless? So there is an ongoing intention about that. But I'd encourage people in that direction.
That's so good. Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, I would just say prepare yourself for delight. Because when you take these practices seriously and make them intentional, you're going to have delightful experiences with people. You're going to see them differently. They're going to look less like the people that we're antagonistic with on social media and more like the people that are beloved by God. And there are just these delightful moments along the way. So see it not as a task or a checklist, but see it as an opportunity to experience the delight of loving people well.
Thank you both so much again for being here. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. We will be back next week with a second episode of this series, Be a Blessing, where we will be talking with a couple of area pastors, Pastor Dave Anderson and Jenna Luado, as they share with us how their church here in Kankakee, Illinois is being a blessing to our community around us. So I'm excited to hear what they have to share with us. And then in a couple more weeks, you'll also be hearing from some resident directors here at Olivet Nazarene University and all that we've learned together from the B.L.E.S.S practices. So we've got some great episodes coming up, so be sure to tune in, and we can't wait to be with you during those times. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you peace. We'll see you next time, friends.
You've been listening to the Faith Together podcast from the Center for Faith and Family at Olivet Nazarene University. Sign up for additional resources at centerff.com. When building faith, we are better together.